Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stewart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look. Well, hello, everybody. We're very honored tonight to have Stan and Holly Deyo on, and we're going to be talking partially about Holly's book that she's just written, Prophetic Perils, and it's so wide and encompassing that we're going to zero in on a few things that Holly thinks everybody should really know about. And to tie that in with her wonderful book, and it's the best out there, it's called Dare to Prepare. And everybody needs a copy of that as well. And we have Larry Taylor with us as well. Hi, everybody. How's everybody tonight? Good.
Hi, Larry.
Good.
Hi, Stewart.
Hi.
Hey, Stan.
Larry?
Hey, Holly. Yeah, Stewart, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Holly, I'm going to turn a part of this over to you because this is such a wide, encompassing book you've written. Where would you like to start on this? It's an incredible array of information that everybody needs to have.
Thank you for those kind words, Stewart. Let me share a little tidbit here right off the top. Whether a person is Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, New Age, pagan, or a non-believer, everybody except the most blind senses something is looming. Normal life has switched from one of expectancy or normalcy to expectancy. They know something is coming. This fellow in Virginia, he's a prepper. His name is Jay Blevins. He summed it up really well. And this is a quote directly from him. We're not talking about folks walking around wearing tinfoil on their heads. We're not talking about conspiracy theorists. I'm talking about professionals, doctors and lawyers and law enforcement and military, normal, everyday people. They can't necessarily put their finger on it, but there's something about the uncertainty of our times. They know something isn't quite right. Well, Blevins is right, and while a lot of people have heard about end times, whether they're Christian or not, they know that the Bible addresses the end of this age, and they want to know what's coming. Would you agree with that?
I would certainly agree with that. In fact, I think people, this is a question for both of you actually, and even Larry. Is it possible that catastrophe and previous catastrophes that are written about in the ancient literature are actually written, the memories of it are somehow written unconsciously in our DNA, and that people do in fact sense something is coming, they just don't know what it is?
Gee, I don't know whether it's written in our DNA. I suppose it could be, but there is some sort of a sixth sense that humans get, perhaps not as well developed as the animal world, but we see a lot of people in the food store and shops and places where we go that do have that kind of nagging feeling that something's not right, and they're waiting for the sword to drop, you know. So whether it's DNA or otherwise, I think it's a real event, you know, in our culture now.
People can just
when
look
when
at
you
the
were
news
writing
and
this,
see
Holly,
the
did you have a sense of urgency? Maybe that's not the right word.
No, that is totally correct. Let me just share a little bit of background here. Most people know Stan, but not very many people know what I've gone through. Nothing bad, but in 6th grade Sunday school, we had to read the Bible cover to cover. Every Sunday, the teacher would talk about the things that we were supposed to have read, and I have to tell you, it wasn't very satisfying because, first of all, the King James Version sounded really stilted to a 12-year-old kid. The only thing that wasn't was the prophecy material, and that was absolutely fascinating. And a lot of the material was confusing and very dry, like all the begats in Genesis that laid out Jesus' lineage. That was, I'm sorry, but kind of a yawn until you get to be older and then you realize the importance. So that led to a 30-year trot down the New Age path because things were written in plain English. They were specific. I read everything of T. Lobsang Rampa and Jane Roberts Seth material, Nostradamus, everything of Ruth Montgomery. She was my favorite person back then. Some of Shirley MacLaine and some of Jess Stern. Then get into the really weird people like Bailey and Blavatsky, but enough to realize there was some really, really scary stuff coming down the pipe. But God, I figure, had a plan because I never lost sight that Jesus is everything about his sacrifice on the cross and that he's God's son. So the giant fly in that pie with New Age material is that a good lot of the time these, quote, prophets were wrong or they contradicted each other. Or else, like Nostradamus, there was too much ginning around with drop this consonant, rearrange these letters, read it backwards. And the biggest objection was that most of Nostradamus' quote predictions, they were so obscure to protect his own safety that the reader could twist what he said in these quatrains, and nearly everything had to be looked at in the rearview mirror. So, prophecy doesn't do you much good if you can only look at it in retrospect. And there was this chemistry professor, Fred Menger, and he says, if you torture data sufficiently, it will confess to almost anything. So,
well, that's true. Yeah.
So I credit 4 people, most of all Stan. I abandoned New Age 20 years ago for the real deal, the Bible, and haven't looked back. So when I hear people that are New Age folks on other radio shows, I'm sad and worried for the listeners because I know firsthand how an honest desire to know and understand what lies ahead can lead people on a path to deception. And there's not much time left. There's no time to be, skirting off the path. We need to stay real and true. So from that standpoint, I took the prophecies from Scripture, since it's the only thing that's 100% accurate. Out of all those prophecies, some 2,500, 2,000 of these have already been fulfilled to the letter. And Dr. Hugh Ross, he's a Canadian astrophysicist, he calculated the odds of this perfect track record to be less than 1 in 10 to the 2,000th. That's 10 with 2,000 zeros after it. And it's such a vast number, there's not even a name for it. So while some prophets and seers might be right half of the time, why not go with 100%? So that's what Prophetic Perils looks at, is some of these remaining 500 prophecies and what's about to happen, what the indicators are, the specifics of these, and know that these events are going to be life-altering. They are never-before-experienced things, and they are going to rock everybody's world. Won't matter what your faith is or if you've got none. If you're still breathing, your life is going to change radically.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, our life around here changed radically over the last year and a half while she's been writing this. It was a dedicated process, and she would look up from something she was writing or researching and tell me, and I'd think, wow, that's heavy stuff, wow. And, that expectancy we were talking about a while ago just kind of grew and grew and grew between us here as the last year and a half transpired while she was writing all this stuff. It's amazing. I knew all this kind of stuff was happening, but to see it in print and look at the numbers and the graphs and the pictures and stuff, it really brings it home. We're there.
Well, that's some of Satan's doing there. News that's presented over, the internet or TV, in books, newspapers, whatever, is given to people in dribs and drabs. and unfortunately, news media is playing right into Satan's hands doing that because he wants you blind, stupid, and dumb. And without the big picture that we're apt to miss in this, we're not going to know where we're at. So the other thing is people are prone to selective memory. It's human nature. A lot of us are frankly overloaded, and so we forget what happened a year ago, never mind a decade ago. So we're missing these pieces. And Prophetic Perils looks at how things have quickened over the last 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 decades, sometimes even as much as 150 years back. And it shows exactly where that bullseye is pointing today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Larry, on the expectancy, how do you, I know you feel the same way, I think, that, things are accelerating to the point where it's almost you wake up and you wonder, well, is today the day?
Well, I'll tell you what, Stewart, and my heart jumped the other day, or a couple of weeks ago when I was reading Stan and Holly's website, and I saw that the news was going to return to the website, the Daily News, and I thought, oh my God, that's great, because I'll tell you, I have been one of the biggest fans of the Stan and Holly Deyo News, and I know Holly did a lot of that, and spent hours and hours and hours, and but I didn't know when the news stopped on the Deyo site that she really hadn't gone into hiding. She had actually gone into a really, really deep time of production, so to speak, on this new book and what it was going to entail and all the writing. And I know that it comes out soon, very soon, this month, I believe. And I've already got my call in. I've got one ordered. Can't hardly wait. But, Stewart, I think you're right on that expectancy kind of thing. And I'll just say this and get back off where they can respond. I watch animals up here. I live in a very remote area. It's pretty wild. And, I watch the animals closely. Now, I watch there's a lot of wild animals up here. They're not domesticated at all. And at certain times before storms, because we have incredible electrical storms, and the weather's never been more weird than I'm experiencing today, here in Oklahoma. But I see the animals will vanish. They'll vanish almost a whole day before whatever happens. But there seems to be a lot of electromagnetic activity up here, and they sense that, it appears. And even my own mostly domesticated animals that are, I call my pets, they're mostly civilized. I noticed that they also begin to hunker down, so to speak, and I do believe, watching from that time that tsunami came and all the animals had already evacuated, those areas before it hit. The people hadn't, just the animals, though. I think that there's somehow embedded in life itself a foreknowledge of, it's almost like run. Now, I don't know what Holly's book's going to say completely, but her book may end with the words run, except there's nowhere to run to except Jesus. But, wow, my heart jumped, Holly, when I heard you guys was going to have news again, because there's nothing else like your website, no matter where you look. I mean, there's good websites, but then you guys have been exceptional for years.
Well, Larry, you're very sweet to say that. You're right. I didn't stop reading the news, but I didn't really mind not getting up at 4 o'clock to start on that every day. But I did read still copious amounts every day. I just kind of quit the posting. And, after being immersed in this, as my dad got me hooked on this when I was, just a young kid. And then being immersed in current events for over 40 years, I needed a really serious break. But the other thing that really jumped is how in the last 15 years things have changed dramatically on every single front. And that's why it was compelling to share this information, because the information is coming through government sites, science sites, research companies like Rasmussen and Pew and Eris, and also from news items and pictures and then data I've collected. And then all this stuff has been blended together so you get a good complete picture of these different, there's 6 different groupings of prophecy in Scripture. And then there's all these sub-things underneath each one of those. And I've tried to cover as many of these as possible. And Prophetic Perils has almost 1,600 endnotes in it. So you can go back and check everything yourself. So you know I didn't pull information out of my hip pocket.
Do you, okay, at the same time we're having this expectancy and people know something's around the corner, not knowing what, why do you feel, having done all this research, that people are sort of abandoning the is that just part of the apostasy? Are they afraid? Are they in denial? Both? What would be your...
You didn't quite finish that sentence. Are you talking about abandoning religion, abandoning God, or what?
All of it, really. Abandoning even prophecy. It seems like they're, the hatred for Christianity is growing, the hatred for biblical prophecy. I mean, you start talking prophecy to your neighbor, they roll their eyes and walk away. And it just seems like at a time when I would have thought people would be much more interested in this stuff, it seems like the opposite is happening. And I was wondering if you had any idea why that is true.
Well, it is part of the 6 areas of the signs. You have signs in nature, and that covers earth changes and things that are going on in the sky, the rise of superbugs and bioweapons, and how man and God are placing brick by brick the foundation for worldwide famine and disease. In case you hadn't guessed, I'm backtracking a little bit. I'm going to get to your specific question here in just a minute. But we also then have signs in society, and this covers increased drug use, increased violence, and just a general hardening of people's hearts and focusing on me. And then you've got the shifting sexual norms. So into where you were talking there, Stewart, are the spiritual signs, and this includes the rise of fake messiahs. You should have seen some of these turkeys I uncovered looking at that section. It was, well, I would say it was funny, but it's really sad. But anyway, that's one of the signs. People are leaving Christianity. They're embracing paganism and witchcraft, and to a lesser degree, full-on Satanism. And the rise of atheism just in the U.S. alone has doubled just in the past couple of years. Part of it's due to the moral failings of church leaders. People are disillusioned. And all of this is helping to fuel a mass exodus from organized religion and some entirely away from God, just in full revolt. And part of it's due to Christians being persecuted around the world and even here. And probably most importantly, we're removing God from nearly everything. The 10 Commandments, you can't pray in school, you get in trouble, you can't hand out any flyers, you can't talk God. Even the news, I think it was ABC, edited out from under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. They said, oh, sorry, it was just a little screw up there, we'll go fix that. Well, then they did it again. So there's a concerted effort, and again, I blame media a lot, news media. They are very liberal. They even admit that. But they're out there to make this a very secular nation.
Yeah.
Society, yeah. Hello?
I don't know whether to blame just the current administration or to blame people. I think we're individually responsible for electing our leaders, and people have just been electing leaders that would give them handouts, my Obama phone type stuff, and we've just atrophied because it's like pigs at the trough now. And there's no honor left in our society. It's sad. just really sad.
Well, another issue is a very sore point is political correctness. We are going to politically correct ourselves right out of existence. I read the point on the front of Drudge that he has imported over 1 million Muslims.
Obama has.
Yeah. And what did I say? Something else? No, Obama. Yes. And somebody on radio the other day made a very astute observation. It's nothing that we didn't know, but this guy just put it into words that really made sense. He says, look, a country must have glue, and that glue is shared values, shared basic outlook on life. And when you have people that love death more than life and treat women like they're goats, and we're just so diametrically opposite from extreme Muslims. I'm sure there's many, many, many millions around the world that are absolutely delightful, wonderful people. But, their religion is getting hijacked, and unfortunately, a lot of that is taking place in our country with the help of this administration giving them free reign.
Yeah, well, look, we've got the Saudi in the White House with Obama today, and we know that the Saudis had something to do with financing 9/11, and that the Saudis have been financing, connected with financing Osama bin Laden and a lot of other terrorist organizations. They're selective about which terrorist organizations they support and which ones they fight. But here you have this very wealthy prince of the House of Saud over here meeting with our Congress, and he's not even a king yet. He's rising to power, and you can see this Arabization or Islamization of America happening when they're coming over and doing all this stuff. And we can get into this later, Holly. Like buying up things in America, just unbelievable what's going out the door.
So Obama made a comment just recently. He said very profound changes are coming to America, and he indicated it was just around the corner. Would this be part of this operation that took place in Orlando, do you think?
I don't know if that. I mean, that might certainly add weight to it, but I know that from kind of leaked information we've been getting, that we're going to see a massive change in a way that we didn't see coming, and I don't know what that would be. Holly and I have tried to figure it out, but right around the corner, something massive is about to happen.
You mean he's going to institute more changes than he's already done when he's promised he was going to fundamentally transform America?
I would think probably what he's going to do is put the capstone on the changes, maybe.
Oh, that guy. Gee.
Well, I try not to concentrate on that too much because I will be bald from pulling out my hair, thinking about all the stuff he's done.
Well, it's just amazing to me that the American people, like Hillary's a criminal. I mean, let's be honest about it. She's done a lot of things that, like Obama, I think one article I read said he had about 35 impeachable offenses, but nobody's going to touch him. He is, are you familiar, Holly, with the Kenyan prophecy?
No.
Well, it took place in 1912, and it was a Kenyan Christian elder. And he prophesied that a son of Kenya would become the president of the United States, and he would be the last president. And under his reign, the United States would be basically destroyed.
Wow.
Well, here we have a son of Kenya, born in Kenya, whether anybody wants to believe it or not. It's immaterial. Everybody else knows he was born in Kenya. So here we have this guy who has taken over the United States, and it seems to me that he's done an excellent job. I don't think anybody could do better at destroying this nation. I think that's what he's here for, and I think he knows that's what he's here for.
Well, that's at least one promise he's kept.
Yeah, that's right. Before we wander off too far, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I said you got to wonder how much longer we're going to be able to have this freedom of, reporting these things over the internet and, over like Blog Talk Radio and DVDs. I expect a clamp to come down on all of us that are doing this, and they'll probably call us terrorists.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they're laying the groundwork for that. And I think this, these new rules that they're coming out with for the internet to control it and to surveil it are just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. And yeah, we will be shut down because the Lord said the night comes when you can no longer work. So that's one of the reasons I called it Night Shadows, actually, for the radio program, because the night is almost here. We got the shadows already.
Yeah, certainly.
And with Holly's work, did you get into any time schedules at all, or when you think this may come down quicker, or anything like that?
On that, Stewart and Larry, Stan, I base that on Scripture that says Israel, which is God's timepiece, says that when Israel became a nation again, which was May 14, 1948, that generation that saw that come into being would see the end of times. So you have to ask yourself, what is a generation? Well, you're going to use 1948 as your starting point, and there are different cases in the Bible for a generation being 40 years. Well, we've already blown by that. That would be 1998, and it didn't happen. 88, and I'm always bad at math, thank you. And then there's 70 years. Sorry?
Yeah, isn't
and
70 the most
years
accepted?
Yeah, and 70 is about that. So if you back off, and I'm not date setting, I'm just using that since we don't have a specific on what is a generation. But if you back that off 7 years for tribulation, and you add that 70 years to the 1948, you're looking right now, soon.
Yes. I did some research on it on the Omega Code, and I always came up with 2017. I went back to the 120 years of Noah, and Jesus said, as it was, so would it be again. And I dated everything from the first Jewish Congress laying down the groundwork for present-day Israel. And here it is, 2017. So, yeah, it seems like everything is here.
Stewart, I agree with what you're saying time-wise, because there's another way in the Jewish community to look at the age of a generation. 70 years, you're looking at a righteous generation. It's 75 years for an unrighteous generation in the land, and that would take us to 2023. Back off 7 years to 2016. So we're
that's interesting.
Yeah. We're about to start.
Wow.
So we're in the season, as they say. Not sure exactly when, but so close you can smell it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, before we get into some specifics here, I'd like to give a couple of caveats, but go ahead and say what you wanted to say first there, Stewart.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to try and steer it back into that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, first, let's say here that the Bible doesn't assign reasons why certain prophetic signs would see obvious and significant increases. The birth pangs or the quickenings, as they say, just that you would see them in end times. For example, there's the old debate about global warming, and now more neutrally called climate change. Is it man-made or is it a natural cycle? It doesn't matter. And here's why. Whatever the cause, we still have to deal with the consequences. It's like, did you shut your finger in the car door or hammer it to death? Well, it doesn't matter. Your finger is still smashed.
Yes.
The reason I say it doesn't matter about the cause of climate change is because when the oceans heat up, they're so vast that they take way too long to cool, maybe several decades. We don't have decades. And it's doubtful we even have one before tribulation starts. This is kind of what we were just discussing there. Another example is earthquakes. They can be triggered by man's actions or natural buildup on tectonic plates, with the pressure. About 20 years ago, prophecy scholars were largely unaware of fracking and the problems. Never mind its pros and cons, we're not getting that discussion. But it's contributed in a big way to increased earthquake activity. So whenever wastewater is shoved back into the ground, something has to give, and often it's land stability, and earthquakes result. So since fracking is being done in many parts around the world, we should see a great increase in many more smallish earthquakes. About the time that fracking got to be a big deal, USGS adjusted their numbers drastically upward for small quakes. And they jumped from 400,000 a year to 1.3 million a year.
Wow.
So look at Oklahoma, for example. In 2014, they experienced 600 Richter 3 and higher quakes. That's more tremblers than they had in all 35 years before that combined. Then last year, Oklahoma was hit with over 900 shakers. So whatever the cause, it doesn't change prophecy, but it goes toward fulfilling it. Something else to look at, as long as we're talking about earthquakes and numbers creeping up, let's look at destructive and dangerous earthquakes. That's something we can measure with reliability for at least 7 decades. And to be a destructive, dangerous earthquake, the USGS says it has to meet at least one of these 4 things. It has to cause at least $1 million in damages. It has to kill at least 10 or more people. It has to be at least a Richter 7.5 or on the Richter scale there, or a 10 on the Mercalli, or it has to generate a tsunami. Well, to get a tsunami, it has to be a big deal. So there's no way that USGS or any of these other entities could sweep under the mat a little rumble like that and say it was a false reading. It is definitely a quake. So in 1950, the NESDIS, that's a wing of NOAA, they registered 22 of dangerous and destructive quakes. Then 6 decades later, they recorded 3.5 times that many. And it's not that there's more seismic equipment installed, because quakes of this size would be detected very far away. And in Prophetic Perils, I've charted them, and it shows a steady rise since 1950 with really weird, sharp pop-ups upward every 20 years. The first one was in 1970, and then another one in 1990. Then in 2002, there was a huge spike that made those other 2 look like jokes. And then another huge one in 2008, just as big. So not only are destructive and dangerous earthquakes increasing, their spikes are getting closer together. So again, God doesn't assign or limit the causes for increases in these events, those birth pangs, just that they're coming. And God always stays within the laws of physics. We may not understand all of it, but that is the way He plays the game there. And the second caveat on for Prophetic Perils is that the material is not to ever denigrate any person's lifestyle or faith. Prophecy sends out certain things as prophecy end times indicators, and it just states the truth in stories and in photos, it being the book, data and when it's examining these signposts. So none of the three main religions, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, are escaping anything. Everybody's at fault. So I'm not picking on anyone or anything in particular. I just picked up on the prophetic clues, followed the information, and some of that took us down some pretty dark paths, pretty ugly places, and some of the findings I discovered they just weren't fit to print, so I didn't. But you're still going to have an unmistakable picture of where we are, and where we're going is undeniable.
I was looking at Holly's book here, just reviewing some of it when we sent it off to press. She's got a section in there, or a chapter in there, about the prophecies various well-known Christian ministers and evangelists have given since the turn of, the 20th century, back, in the 1900s. And when you read that section of all the things, from George Washington up to Branham and, Stone and all kinds of other people making this, it's called Visions of America's Destruction. And you just see the writing on your own wall, man. We are there. And that chapter is absolutely, wow, gripping,
Man.
You finish reading that and you want to get out there and pack your bags.
Whoa.
Well,
what
anyway,
about this? Yeah, go ahead, Helen.
No, you go ahead, Stewart. What about what?
I was going to ask about this Pacific Northwest specifically, and California, of course, coming down all the way down through Oregon, California. FEMA seems to have been running a number of drills concerning that area. Is there something they may know that we don't?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, because we don't have access to the data. We don't know whether they're just being prudent and spending our money on something practical or what. We are seeing, as Holly pointed out, increased earthquakes all over the planet. And that area up in the northwest, as you know, is next to the Juan de Fuca plate. It is building up pressure, has been for, it's overdue by about 57 years for a release of a Richter 9+ earthquake, which would absolutely hurt America and Americans. So the fact that they are making these drills and doing it kind of little low-key things, if I were a responsible leader in this country, I would probably approach it that way rather than just coming out and saying over the press, okay, well, it looks like it's going to happen next week, and, good luck, hang on, we'll see you on the other side. You'd cause panic and, anarchy through the country. So what they're doing is letting things leak out through, like people like Holly and I. You go ahead and you see that you got a problem, you talk about it, get prepared and that kind of stuff. And little bit by little bit, the thinking people of the population will start to be won over to the viewpoint that, yeah, something's about to happen, so we better prepare. And there won't be this panic and this anarchy and, civil disobedience. So these little drills and stuff, I think, are kind of a way to warn people that you kind of better think about this. Maybe it's time to move if you're on the fault line, that kind of stuff. It's not only in this country. I mean, they're doing that down in New Zealand, where they have that caldera at Lake Taupo. We've been getting information back that, I had a dream vision. Well, it was back in '96 or '7, Holly, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's up on our website on Dream Visions about the eruption, a super eruption of this caldera. It's like the Yellowstone of the Southern Hemisphere. And now then they're putting money, $60,000 toward one project to a guy to investigate how long it's going to be, not if it happened, but when is it going to happen, this eruption. And they're seriously looking at increasing temperatures and the various sensors they've got there. So there and here in Yellowstone, I'm sure there are other things going on there because we've had, leaked intelligence over the last couple of years to us by people working on it. So that's kind of east of Mount St. Helens. But there's another dream vision I had for America back along those, back in the 90s, which, I saw 6, maybe 8 volcanoes from Mount St. Helens all the way down to Mexico City, all erupting at the same time as the western plate started to break and allow that magma to gush up. And people were just trying to get across the Rockies and the Sierras. They were trying to get over on the other side toward the east, and their cars were slipping off the roads because when they were going over mountains and stuff, because the ash was wet, and they'd turn a corner and their car would go off and into the ditch or into a valley, and people were panicking. They couldn't get out.
Yeah.
So that day is coming too.
Yeah, Stewart and Larry, perhaps I can shed a little light on that Pacific Northwest thing.
Mm-hmm.
In 2014, they started dribbling out information about how, based on the last 10,000 years of data, it showed there have been 41 megaquakes that have hit the Pacific Northwest. And it is, as Stan said, it involves the Juan de Fuca plate and the North American plate and how they're locked up. So they started doing these studies, and a FEMA official named Kenneth Murphy says, our operating assumption is that everything west of Interstate 5, I-5, will be toast. That covers 100 miles inland, Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, Portland, Salem, and Eugene wiped out. That affects about 7 million people. And Oregon's Military Department of Emergency Management, they also put Vancouver in those crosshairs too. Now, they've been doing studies on just how bad that's going to be, and FEMA calculates that tsunami, that 100-footer, will destroy about 1 million buildings and 3,000 schools, plus half of all the highway bridges, 2/3 of all railroads and airports there, half of all police stations, and when you don't have the cops around, chaos is going to ensue. There's not going to be anybody to keep everybody, under control. 2/3 of all hospitals gone, and 1/3 of all fire stations. So maybe that's what they're preparing for. They kept us really pretty quiet, and at that point I wish I would still have been doing news because that was certainly newsworthy. But this could be part of that scenario.
So this would be the Juan de Fuca plate going, or what's the other one out there?
The Cascadia subduction zone, you're talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's inland.
Would that be the cause?
Of the earthquake?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Juan de Fuca plate butts up to the Cascadia subduction zone, and you've got volcanoes connected to that, and you've got fault lines connected to that. And believe me, when that goes, it's going to trigger other fault lines south of there towards San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's a bell ringer, and all these earthquakes are building up pressure, these zones, rather, these fault lines, and that Richter 9 plus will kind of just trigger them. I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, well, they say that massive wall of water, that tsunami from this mega thrust quake, will travel all the way over to Japan, and then another one will slop over our west coast. So it's going to be a simultaneous bad disaster.
So we wouldn't have much time.
Well, the people are living there on the coast. They're in deep weeds, frankly.
Wow. So they would have very little time to move, get out, or anything.
Well, that's true, and most of their roads are going north-south, not to the east. And you try and cram all these, millions of cars going east all at once, and you're going to have a mess.
Well, looking at it pragmatically, if the roads are going north and south, then the way to escape it would be go back to Mexico.
You're bad.
I know, I'm bad to the core.
Well, it might help California a little bit, I know, but who knows? It's that's fascinating.
In conjunction with that, even before this Northwest scenario, FEMA had been preparing hugely over there around the New Madrid. I mean, they've got millions of meals already squirreled away, and they have a not too pretty scenario for what they think is going to, be left behind if a New Madrid quake hits. So, they're covering their bases, whether or not they actually shell the food out or keep it for, elite that haven't prepared. I don't know what their plans are. We're certainly not in that category.
Another thought I had on that, Holly, was that they might have been running those exercises over in the New Madrid area and putting away the emergency food supplies and medicine stuff for people further west that are escaping, say, ashfall from Yellowstone. We know that they're monitoring Yellowstone for something big. And this year they discovered that second huge magma pool underneath the one they thought was just the Yellowstone pool. So maybe they're preparing for a migration of survivors from the disasters over west.
Could very well be. I guess it depends on how intact the roads are. They're not going to be able to chopper everybody out or fly them out because the airports will be in wrecks. So it's just basically going to be if you can get out in a car and, if your car is still working, if gas stations are still working, because you can't have enough fuel unless you've got maybe an electric car, to get clear over out of harm's way.
Well, yeah, even flying is going to be dangerous for the aircraft, ingesting all that ash into the engines. It'll bring them down. So, they're just transportation. And, of course, if you could throw in with that some kind of a foreign power hacking our power grid at that time so that we have no power, no news, it'll be absolute chaos.
Wow.
Yellowstone going off, they've had a lot of reports, and then they just kind of disappear. Do you feel there's really a whole lot going on down there that they're just not telling anybody?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I'm not just guessing. I'm telling you. But they're not going to come out and officially tell you because of the anarchy threat. That's the responsible people in the government. I'm not talking about the ones that don't care. But we've gotten responsible information from engineers and seismologists and stuff that are kind of affiliated with what's going on there. I'm not going to name them or anything, but when they put that much compute power monitoring a lot more sensors than they're putting on the internet around Yellowstone, that there is something they're worried about. I don't know whether it will be as big as the last major eruption there, X number of years back, millions or thousands, hundreds of thousands. They use a different time scale than I do, but anyway, a long time ago. But they think this one might not be as bad, but that still means it's going to throw ash over, hundreds of thousands of square miles, millions of square miles probably at this rate.
Not as bad in that scenario is definitely a relative term.
Yeah, true.
When you got ash, from those others that went as far over as Washington, D.C., that was, where it was the thinnest. When it basically covers everything, in smothering soot and ash.
Yes.
It's the ash. It's the worry. It's like little bitty razors, little. You can't breathe it. You can't drive it. It just etches into everything.
Well, it would smother everything. It will clog up. They saw that from Mount St. Helens when that erupted. It clogged up, the rivers, clogged up the streams, killed, millions of fish, tons of animals, and then you got all that mess to clean up. So, and that was just a relatively small little dinky volcano. So, yeah. Any even a minor eruption out of Yellowstone would probably be relatively unpleasant.
Yeah. Well, Larry, wasn't there a fellow that you knew that had a dream or a vision about ash over there in your area?
Well, I did.
Remember
and it
right?
Was, he lived over, and I'm not going to mention him, but he was a retired railroad man that he had... part of his job on the railroad was to, he said there was underground locations up throughout our region here, Oklahoma and Arkansas, where they had invested in railroad tracks that stopped at these locations, and they had invested a lot of foodstuffs and hidden them in those mountains, and years ago. And he said that he had a really incredible dream vision experience one night. He said he dreamed he was in a certain location in Oklahoma, southeast Oklahoma, and that he said ash was everywhere, and they had used graders to grade it up, just like you would in the Northeast, you would grade up piles of snow. He said this was ash, and he said this has never happened. He said, I don't even know why I dreamed this, but he said there were piles of ash everywhere that they had graded up in piles just to get them out of the road so people could even try to go down the roads. And he said, and I'll link this part of it in, this is really interesting, he said during this time something had happened in our government, and he said the people, he said it was the people. Now, he said there were foreigners in our country at this time, and in this town where he lived, and I lived in that area, and I worked in that area, so I know where he's talking about. He said there were lampposts at that time when he had that dream that were different from the ones in the dream. The ones in his dream, though, they were stringing up government officials from those lampposts at people that had betrayed the people. And he said,
wow.
What's so interesting, though, Stan, before I moved out and moved on up into Arkansas and then now to where I'm living now, right at the last, which was probably almost 10 years ago, that town tore down all of their lampposts and they put up the kind that he saw in his dream vision.
Wow.
So we're now, we are literally, and he went and looked at them. He said, those were the ones I saw in my dream. And he said, now we're in the time frame of when they could hang these people in this country, and they'll hang them from those lampposts in this town. And so, it's one of those wow kind of things, you know. And he was a real credible guy. Worked for the railroad all his life.
Well,
it's,
I can understand that.
It's fascinating to me because I had a dream, and I don't tell anybody to believe it. I think it came from the Lord myself, but I never asked people to believe it. But I was in this swing, and it was beautiful blue sky, green grass, and I was swinging under a tree. And a wind came up, and it picked me up and over the tree, and when I landed back down, it was full of ash. Ash was everywhere. And it just makes you wonder why. Go ahead.
What was the significance of the swing? What happened there?
Well, I asked a lot of people to try and figure it out, and the only answer I ever got was maybe you were taken out of here, and when we got back here, it was covered with ash. In other words, the Christians were removed.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, interesting. That'd be nice.
It'd be very nice. And it's just kind of, and I did have a dream about Yellowstone, and when you were mentioning that, it was very, very vivid, and it was on Yellowstone Lake. It was sort of in the wintertime because there was ice along the edges, and animals were running. And I looked to the south, and I saw this mushroom cloud develop that was obviously an explosion. And then another one to the south, and then one to the north. And then I woke up. So it was a multiple eruption. First one gave away, and then I suppose the ground gets shaken, and then it weakens it, and then another one pops up, and another one pops up. And I do remember a movie that I saw later that showed that very scenario where there were multiple eruptions.
I have a lady that does research for us on earthquakes and keeps an eye on things that I don't have time to do sometime. And she wrote in while we were here on the air saying that that she'd been told by the Lord that a Richter 9 is going to hit California. And as I say, she studies earthquake stuff. She's on top of it every day for me. But
did she give a time frame?
No, she didn't. But I'm just seeing a lot of people having dream visions or getting a message from the Lord one way or another that's telling us that these great catastrophes are going to be happening soon.
Wow.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. I'll just mention this because I know we're almost at the top of the hour. But I had a friend that worked for the Department of Louisiana partner in parole. He was a parole officer in Louisiana that came up here and met with me when I was actually living in Arkansas, and we had a visit, and he's passed away now. He died of cancer about a couple of years ago. But he had a really incredible vision. He was shown. It was like he said he was lifted up over America, and he said he looked down and he saw cars, lines of cars. He said it reminds him of the old Grapes of Wrath movie, except in reverse. He said people were coming from the west, going into the middle of the country and going east, and he said people were everywhere with anything they could carry, any possessions they had, any way of vehicle that they could drive or get through, and he said they were all homeless, that they had fled something and fled into the middle of the country, basically like Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana and all that, and they were moving east. Something bad had happened out west, and he said he had no idea. He called them refugees, and he said he had the reason that they had become refugees was unknown to him. Now, he didn't know about what's coming possibly on the West Coast, but he said that he didn't have to live to see this, but he had really dreaded it because in the vision, it was so incredible. He said it was a magnitude greater than, you remember the old Oklahoma Dust Bowl and all that, where they all loaded their families like the Grapes of Wrath and went out to California. He said, but it was in reverse, and it was so much more massive people-wise or population-wise that they were fleeing something. And, of course, now he's gone. But I'll never forget when he sat in McDonald's that day and told me all about that. And I know I believe it's true.
Yeah. Oh. You know, the Dust Bowl thing is a problem. It is forming, and Holly can probably address that more about the aquifers later the next hour. But I was yesterday I heard in the news here that they were telling us to stay out of direct sun here in Colorado and down in Arizona, New Mexico, and because the UV level is so high getting through our upper atmosphere. And like we're at a UV rating of 13 here in Colorado today, and that means if you're out in the sun for more than 10 minutes, you're going to get skin damage. You know, that's how bad the UV is here, and it's part of this whole problem with the sun. And it's not whether it's global warming or not, but it's the sun is a main driver in this, and it's God's wrath coming to get us all. They
put out another warning yesterday for us too, because it was an ozone alert. There's fires in New Mexico and fires in Arizona, and it's coming up so thick, the smoke from those two states, we couldn't even see the mountains here. And they told people, they said, if you've got COPD or asthma, or you've got pets outside, go outside for a minimum time and scamper back inside. Put on your air conditioning.
Wow. Huh. Well, it doesn't, all this stuff is happening all at once now. I was out in the sun today for a little while, and it stings. I mean, it really stings.
Yes. Yeah, and where are you? You're in Wisconsin, aren't you?
Yeah, in Wisconsin, yeah.
Yeah, well,
we had
your
northern
rating
lights
is about
here just the other night.
Yeah, your rating is about a 10, and ours is a 13. And I've been in it much higher over in Perth, and it did the exact same thing you're talking about. It would go through your clothing and sting like little pinpricks all through your skin. It's nasty.
Now, is this a UV change or just a UV acceleration of amount? Is it a different type of UV or
no?
What's
it's
happening?
UVA and B, but we know that there were two new bands of UV that started coming out of the sun in 1991, 92. I talked to the Air Force officer in charge of monitoring it, but it didn't. The bands that were new aren't the kind that damage the skin or cause cancer, that kind of stuff. I think that the problem is when we don't have enough coronal mass ejections and flares from the sun to block the deep space ultraviolet and gamma coming toward the planet, that it gets through our shields. And our charged upper atmosphere is the shield, the ozone layer. When that thins because of the bombardment from deep space, it gets through. And, this is something that happens periodically, normally over the South Atlantic anomaly, but astronauts don't even want to go through that area in rocket ships or space stations because of the the radiation penetration. But our magnetic field is weakening on the whole planet, and that's what holds our shields in place in the upper atmosphere. So maybe this is a sign of something weakening there.
Oh. So if it weakens down, could it weaken down to a 0 point? I read an article, and I don't know if it was true or not, where they said it collapsed for a couple hours. The
I
whole
don't
shield
remember.
went down?
I don't remember reading that, but the collapse theoretically can go to zero magnetic field as the magnetic poles invert. I don't think that will happen. I think it'll be more like first the South Pole, the North Pole will flip, and it won't flip overnight. It'll start to turn, and over a few days it will flip. And the South Pole will not have started to flip yet, and we'll see it then start to follow suit. And NASA's simulations of this say that when that happens, that we might end up with 3 pairs of north-south poles floating around inside the magnetic field of the Earth, inside the Earth, in the core. So that'll create some areas with a lot of magnetism where they add up, and some with none where they cancel out. And if you're underneath the sky and the sun is shining in those areas, it will certainly damage your skin. It will create nausea. It'll create diarrhea. We've seen this happen in the islands near Central America when, it's kind of east of there into the Atlantic, but where some of the islands were hit by the ultraviolet increase as there was a hole in the ozone layer over the South Atlantic anomaly, and it expanded. And I talked to people while it was happening on the phone there, and children were sick. Adults were disoriented and vomiting. Believe me, when that happens, you don't want to be out in it.
Now, are those long-lasting effects, or do you get healed if you get out of it?
Well, the cancer side of it,
permanently damaged.
Your skin will be permanently damaged if you get too much of it. Even where we are now at 13 on the scale, if you're out in it more than 10 minutes, you're getting permanent skin damage. So that gives you a clue.
Oh. Well, that's good information to know. So your recommendation would be for people to really watch it from now on, at least in the southern parts of the United States, or all over. I mean, if you said it was 10 here, and it was really stinging, I got out of it as soon as I could. But
go to
this is something they need to know about, for sure.
Yeah, if you just go into a Google search for UV levels USA in Google, and put in there NOAA, UV search levels NOAA. There is a site on NOAA that has a UV index map that's daily, and you can see what your area is rated, and it'll give you down at the bottom of how many minutes you can be out in it without skin damage. Where you are, they say you can stay up to 15 minutes without skin damage.
Wow.
Today.
And if you stay out in it too long, then the other things begin to nausea and diarrhea. You don't feel good.
Possibly.
Blah blah.
Yeah, possibly. If you're feeling that sharp pinprick, then you're in an area where you don't want to be out in it that long.
Wow. Well, Holly, you did a lot of research too on the sun. You want to get into that a little bit? We don't take a break. We just keep going on this show.
Oh, okay. Well, I think probably I'd let Stan talk about the sun. I want to talk about famine whenever the schedule goes.
Let me do a bit of sun stuff then. I don't know whether you guys watch the Soho imagery for every day that they put out showing what the sun's doing, but in the last month, May 7th up till now, the planet Venus has been doing a close approach going around the backside of the sun relative to us, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before. We're supposed to be in a solar sunspot minimum, the quiet sun. And I was just looking at it for we on air, the animation of it, day by day, hour by hour. And you see Venus is bright. It's almost as big as the sun in the image. heading toward the sun, going down there toward the sun, and as it gets right close to the sun, huge flares and eruptions are coming off it. As it goes behind it, wham, wham, wham,
Wow.
back around the other side now. I just don't think that's normal. It's not. And so with the sun itself going through phase state changes, I'm sure, with the extra UV frequencies coming out of it since 91, that we do have to realize that the sun is an instrument that the Lord is going to use to either bless us or punish us. And at the moment, I think the world is in a punishment cycle. There's going to be more happening. I think we're going to see more ejecta coming, more stuff coming off of the sun. It's going to do something that we've never seen before, throwing off a lot of mass and a shell of mass. And it's not going to take a million years as the standard timing goes with physicists. I am positive with the research I've been doing here in the last year that Earth and the universe are on a very short time scale. They are not like 15 billion years old. That's nonsense. We're in a catastrophic time zone. Everything is happening in maybe tens of thousands of years maximum in the universe. It's not older than like 50 or 60 or 70,000 years. And it's because of an era that was made in the calculation of the Big Bang. When you accept the Big Bang, that everything in the universe, all the mass, was all crammed down into this little pinhead shape, at the very beginning, it was so dense that radiation, light, is a radiation, that all electromagnetic radiation traveled much faster. I mean, like 10 with 30 to 60 zeros after it, faster than it does now. And as the universe expanded, it got less dense. And the less dense the carrier of a wave like light, then the slower it goes. And this exponentially expanded and decreased in density in space, and that 15 billion years got really reduced rapidly. And Barry Setterfield did an interesting paper. He's got a website that tells you his paper and explains how this change in the speed of light has resulted in us assuming that radioactive decay, which is how we measure things, was a constant and it was an error. And when you apply these proper values to it, catastrophes happen a lot quicker, changes happen a lot quicker, and the age of our sun is such that it could go to a red giant stage. I don't think it will just yet, but it's within 1,000 years, I think it'll happen. So we're going to see changes in the sun, and it's going to get hotter. There's no question about that. And our attitude, our angle of the planet to the sun may also change. Holly and I were talking about this just before we went on air. I've been researching, even Einstein said this, that the Earth itself, the whole Earth inside, on the surface and the core, does not have to flip upside down or tilt for the surface to move. And so the crust, if you wish, of the Earth is not anchored to the underneath part of the Earth in the core and in the magma layers in between. It's such that a minor event, astronomically speaking, could cause the entire surface of the Earth, not the Earth, but the entire surface, to shift by 15 to 20 degrees. And that's why they think that the mammoths, were quick frozen with their last meal in their mouth. It wasn't a gradual thing. It happened within minutes, and they were deep frozen because the Earth's crust shifted. And that is tantamount to, a physical pole reversal or a physical pole shift. And that could actually flip upside down like a top and still leave our core doing what it's doing and then catch up with it later. So all these things tied to the sun, and then, there are a lot of other things that flow downhill from that with famine and drought. And Holly, you can pick that up there with what that's doing to our crops and how it's reducing the amount of food we've got available.
I'll do that. I want to insert one thing that's very cool. I know we've been talking about a lot of really heavy things, and the next topic I talk about, famine, is going to be probably about as heavy as it gets. So I want to interject this one really uplifting sign from the Lord. It shows in prophecy that we will see signs in the heavens, signs in the skies, signs in the moon and the stars, and signs in the sun. something so cool happened this last year, and it was the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem again. Now, right before all that, we had the blood moon tetrad. That was a last warning. But this second appearance of the Star of Bethlehem is a monumental promise of Jesus' soon return. The first time it came out, it heralded his birth. And in 2,000 years, it has only happened once, and that was summer of last year. So can it be that the Lord is not just so very close to his return? And for anybody that missed it, what happened was that Jupiter and Venus, they converged just less than a third degree apart. Either one of those is a brilliant beauty, but when they were so close, they just exploded in brilliance out there. And even as late as October, I would get up early every morning. It was just a blessing to get up and see it and be revitalized and know that this is God's promise to us. He's issued over 5,000 promises in the Bible, but it's really uplifting when you can actually see them. Like, for instance, every time a rainbow comes up, we remember God's promise that he would never again destroy the world by water. And the Star of Bethlehem couldn't anything but be the promise of his return. So not only did this Star of Bethlehem occur for a matter of months, but it also appeared in the constellation of Leo, which is the lion. And Jesus' other name is the Lion of Judah. So these two planets appeared to make a single star, and that conjunction occurs with Regulus, and that's the King star. And what's Jesus? The King of Kings. How's that, guys?
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the signs have been there. I do remember Hail Bob, and one night we went out there and there was a conjunction, and I can't remember what it was, but when you go outside on a clear night and you see all this, there's no way that the Lord is not writing his message in the heavens. I mean, there's just no way. It's too bad that people have forgotten so much of astronomy and what it meant, and the constellations, and the story of salvation in the constellations.
Did you read Bollinger's book on it, The Witness of the Stars and things like that?
Yes. Yeah. Fascinating.
It is, absolutely. It's so correct, so true.
Well, guys, for something else that's on our horizon here, you know, we are living in the land of plenty, and it's really hard to think how in the world could this world see a worldwide famine. But we know it's coming. It's in Scripture, and it is a big deal. The prophecy about earthquakes occurring in different places around the world, probably everybody on the planet, even non-believers, are aware of that prophecy. But it's only mentioned in 3 books, even as important as it is. But the warning about this coming famine is mentioned in 7 books. All 3 of the Gospels, everybody but John, and then in Jeremiah, Deuteronomy, Ezekiel, and Revelation. So the fact that God continually hammers this means we are supposed to be peeling the blinders off and get prepared spiritually and physically. So we've had famines here ever since 1200 A.D. and clear back to biblical times. And some of the worst hit countries included Eastern Europe, Russia, and Ukraine. They were reduced to rampant cannibalism as recently as the 1930s. One account tells about Stalin. He sent Soviet troops and secret police to raid the Ukraine villages. They stole their harvest and all their food in their homes. This is a direct quote from that report, quote, "They dropped dead in the streets, lay dying and rotting in their houses, and some women became so desperate for food that they ate their own children. If they managed to fend off starvation, they were deported and shot in the hundreds of thousands," end quote. So famine is still present with us. We have famine and food shortages repeatedly in China and India, 2/3 of Africa, the Scandinavian countries. It's also hit Western Europe and France and Germany and the UK. Even the American Southwest saw famine. This happened to the Anasazi Indians. Their drought was so severe and unrelenting that it eventually forced them from their native area there in the Four Corners region of the U.S., where Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico all come together. Now, these people were so amazing. I'm going to digress just a little bit so you can appreciate how phenomenal these people were. They were exceptional builders, and they lived in the Four Corners area roughly from 100 BC to 1300 AD. Some of their structures there were 5 stories high, and they boasted 800 rooms in these buildings. No multifamily dwellings equaled their size in America until the 1870s. So they were quite the builders. They also did some phenomenal feats there because they had to haul and shape and put in the right spot 30 million stones. And I'm not talking about like pebbles. We're talking big, building blocks. They didn't have any trees close by, so they literally dragged 100,000 timbers 30 miles away for the roof beams. They didn't have the wheel and they didn't have animals, so when I say drug them, they did. They dragged these things. And they created these towns carefully. They planned them all out. They decorated them. They had a web of 500 miles of roads, and each road was 30 feet wide, and they all radiated out like in a spider web from Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. It is odd that they made them this wide without having the wheel or the animals, as I said. But anyway, whether these roads crossed over deserts or traversed high dunes or went down deep into canyons, they were still perfectly ramrod straight. And the Anasazi had also built a sophisticated astronomical observatory on top of this thing called Pahita Butte, and they tracked when to plant and when to have their ceremonies, and they even had an intricate system of dams and canals to irrigate their crops because they're living in the desert. So they also used water catchment off of Chaco's huge rim. So they were really bright, very clever people. And at the best of times, life was pretty tough living in the desert, but doable. And then something changed. It got worse. It got a lot worse. And something awful drove them from their magnificent cities and villages. And this awful thing was a 30-year drought. That combined with violence and war and cannibalism. And the sad thing was, if they had just been able to hang on a few more years, I don't mean like a few as in 20, but as in a couple, it got very wet. But the Anasazi vanished and they never returned.
That's true.
Yeah, it's true. So anyway, we still have famines and food shortages today. They're mostly in Africa and Russia. And just since 1970, over 31 million Africans have starved. Now, everybody knows about that. I think, even as a kid, remember, if I didn't want to eat peas, Mom would say, eat your peas, people in Ethiopia are starving. That was the common threat. So, everybody was very aware of food shortages. But, would you think you could have famine today here in America, here in England, in Canada, in Australia, in every place that's westernized and has plenty? Well, there are several scenarios that are all too real that could very likely bring about massive famine. One of these are volcanic eruptions that, the large ones from supervolcanoes that create a nuclear or volcanic winter. They spew out, as we talked about earlier, all this ash that will smother the crops. They can't live under coatings of ash like that. They either get bent over or they couldn't respirate because their pores are all clogged, and then the sun gets blocked out, so they have no light. This happened in 1883 when Krakatoa erupted, and it affected the weather there for 4 years and brought on huge blizzards. And then recently, this happened in 1991 when Mount Pinatubo erupted, and it dropped global temperatures for 3 years, and it's not even a supervolcano. So we've got 20 of these big boys around the world. Some are dormant, some are extinct, and some are simmering. And then just recently, a journal called Nature Geoscience published 2 new studies, and it showed that supervolcanoes can just explode and erupt spontaneously. They don't need triggers like your everyday volcanoes do. So when a supervolcano erupts, no sun equals no crops. So we've talked about the extended droughts, and in Scripture, drought is always a punishment. It's now clobbered California for 5 years straight. It struck hardest right in their fruit and veggie basket, which extends from the San Joaquin Valley in the south clear up to the Sacramento and Central Valleys up north. California grows more than a third of all of America's vegetables and 2/3 of our fruit and nuts. So if we don't have California's food, it's got to come from someplace else. And they supply over 200 crops to Americans and also around the world. So the horrible drought they've been experiencing, it's cost them just in 2014 and 15 over $5 billion, and plus 21,000 jobs evaporated. They had a wet March this year, but it wasn't enough to get them out of the worst 2 drought categories. It covers still more than half of the state. But what's weird is California is the only state out of 50 experiencing this.
And I wonder why.
Wouldn't be because of their governmental attitudes towards the Lord, would it?
It might be. Good guess.
Well, last year, meteorologists said that even for a world getting used to wild weather, may seem to, and this was their words, stuck on strange. Since 2010, newscasts have doubled the amount of time that they spend on crazy weather and natural disasters, and it's quadrupled since just 20 years ago. So weather is going to play a very big role in this. Now, let's think about a few other things that can impact our food, and some of this is what Stan talked about with the sun. More likely and even worse than a supervolcano is likely an attack on our power grid. Our poor grid is 50 to 60 years old, and it's 20 years past its dead date, so it's kind of on life support. When the grid was built, we only had half the people here that we do now. And with more people living in America legally and illegally, and a warming planet, it's making even higher demands on an ailing structure. It just wasn't prepared or designed to handle such high numbers of people and all their power needs. So how can this grid come down, this poor little tenuous thing out there that keeps our lives on track and normal? Well, we've got solar storms that Stan spoke about. There's nuclear attack and hackers. Now, this sounds pretty, weird and far out and unlikely, but just think about what's already happened. These first 2 things, solar storms and nuclear attack, they produce 2 different versions of EMPs, which is electromagnetic pulse. The power grid can and has been hit by a massive solar storm. It's called a geomagnetic storm, and that can cause transformers to fail. In simple terms, when huge charges come off the sun and they hit the transformers, they get overloaded and burn up, which in turn overloads the next transformer and the next transformer, and then they begin to fail, just like dominoes, all around the country. This has happened before. Solar storms have slammed us twice. One was the Carrington event in 1859. We didn't have the grid then, so we didn't have the massive effects that we would today. And then we had the big event in 1989 that it messed up places like Quebec and all of the U.S. Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had, since those two hits, we've had two near misses. One in 1921 and then another in just 2012. And they said, the scientists said that was at least the size of the Carrington event. And they said if it had hit, it would have taken us 4 to 10 years to recover.
And that's probably accepting the fact that the Chinese would actually make the transformers and get us to us in that time. But we're totally dependent on offshore manufacturing of those transformers. So, I think that estimate's probably wrong.
I'm sitting here in darkness right now with you guys. My electricity went out about 30 minutes ago, and I'm sitting here listening to you talk about electricity failures, and you're exactly right, Holly. I just have to amen every bit of that.
Well, thanks, Larry. Now, those things were caused by the sun, but the most probable and far-reaching event is a nuke detonated overhead or from just offshore. And yes, Russia's been caught on numerous occasions skulking around our shores undetected till their subs were right on top of us. And now North Korea is practicing launching missiles off subs, and they've got that nut Kim Jong-un at the helm. So there's no telling what he'll do as he continually shakes his fist at us and at South Korea. A detonated nuke produces that same effect as a solar storm, but it can do much, much greater damage. And the U.S. is similarly threatened by the capabilities of Iran, Russia, and China. So just as what Stan was starting to talk about there, when these transformers fail, we can't just replace them quickly. They're all custom built overseas. Some of these weigh 800,000 pounds. They take up as much room as a single family home, and they cost about $8 million a piece, so we don't have spares sitting around just waiting to switch out. Plus, we've got 2,100 of these things scattered around the country. So, that's a few dollar signs there. Anyway, a few years ago, the companies that built them overseas, they were backlogged 3 years. And each of these can take up to a couple years to build, and it's 5 years if they have trouble getting the bushings that they need and that special electrical steel and the special copper that they use on these. So do the math. It's not pretty. Can you imagine what the effect would be of tens of millions of people without power for 5 to 10 years? The death toll would be absolutely huge. Frank Gaffney, he's the president of the Center for Security Policy. He estimated that 9 out of 10 people would die within a year.
Wow. Hey, even with these power things, Holly, do you, we were talking about how the Chinese are buying up land and water and resources here and in Australia, and now the Saudis. The Saudis, you in your book, you mentioned how they have like the biggest aquifer failure in the world, and that feeds 80 million people there in Saudi Arabia, and he's over here. I don't know what he's doing with our president now. What are some of the things that they are buying, and taking away from us? I mean,
you're kind of jumping ahead there, big guy.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
Now, look, I've got to share this one thing here. I guess Stan's wanting me to scooch on here, but this is one thing that I have to really watch my language because just reading it again, thinking about it again, really gets my hair on fire. Our government knows that they can fix the grid, but they aren't. They just aren't. Have no clue why, unless there is an agenda afoot. Now, Newt Gingrich, he's the former Speaker of the House. He addressed this grid issue to Congress years ago, and it fell on deaf ears. Then 6 PhDs, a retired Air Force general, a cybersecurity expert, and an energy company bigwig, they wrote a 208-page assessment in 2008 entitled, and it's kind of an ugly, dumb, boring title, but Report of the Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from Electromagnetic Pulse Attack. They presented this to Congress. The report was very sobering, and yet Congress wasn't moved to do anything. Talk show host George Noory, he's been on a bandwagon with his 13 million nightly listeners to sound the alarm for about 2 years now. In my first edition of Prudent Places USA in 2003, I wrote about this EMP threat to our power grid in that very first edition and in every edition since then. And then William Fortune, he wrote 2 books on this subject and has also addressed Congress on this threat, and nothing gets done. So any bills that have been introduced to fix the grid, they just lie there dying on the vine. And guys, it was 3 years ago tomorrow that Representative Trent Franks introduced H.R. 2417, the High Voltage Infrastructure for Electricity from Lethal Damage Act. That's a mouthful, so I'm sorry, I do have to read it. It's otherwise known as the SHIELD Act.
Mm-hmm.
When that got introduced there in June 18, 3 days after it was introduced, it was dead. 3 different committees passed it around. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to fiddle with it. And so today, it still sits there dead. Then, October of this past year, Senator Corker from Tennessee, he's a Republican, so I was fairly well shocked at this. He introduced S. 2152 to get this, electrify Africa. Obama signed it less than 4 months later on February 6th of this year. So do you think that's got anything to do with Obama's relatives? So here we sit. We're clothing everybody else while our own pants are hanging around our ankles. It would only cost $2 billion to harden the grid. $2 billion, that's it. To most of us, that's a lot of money, but get this, it's less than 2% of what America spends on illegal immigrants and amnesty people every year. You can make this deadly problem go away with $2 billion. That's it.
So then you would have to ask the question, why is all that happening? Is, like you sort of indicated, an agenda is afoot?
Oh, yeah.
That they know perfectly
definitely.
well they're going to fail the grid?
Well, you see, in a grid-down situation, it's going to be very lethal for people. An astronomer, Don Goldsmith, he estimated a grid down, and this is for the people that even survive, it would cost $2 trillion. And recovery, if that's even possible, depends on how many transformers go down and how many years it would take to get the transformers built overseas and shipped back. So, I mean, it is a very, very grim scenario. The bottom line is, before a lot of this other prophecy can be fulfilled, America's got to be taken out.
Yes.
The long and the short of it.
Wow.
So if the grid didn't have these problems that aren't enough, now we've got hacking. And the Washington Free Beacon reported 2 years ago that the Russians had hacked our critical water and our energy systems. They found this out because they left behind malicious software called Black Energy, and a variant of that. They had put both of these in numerous control systems that gave the hackers remote access. Now, black energy has been around since at least 2007, and it's sold through the deep web, and is pushed primarily by the Russian gang Kuda. So literally anybody can get their hands on it, even ISIS.
Mm.
But Russia's not alone. Enter China. They've also hacked our infrastructure. In May 2013, International Business Times reported that China had breached our dams database, which is held by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They hacked that website. Now you think, okay, dams, big deal. Well, that site contains information on all the vulnerabilities of thousands of our dams. Not only could it put our water supplies at risk, it could jeopardize the power grid. And the database shows how many people would die if any of the over 8,100 dams fail. It might say Lake Pueblo, 2,300 people would perish. Hoover Dam, that's probably a gazillion people there. But it has all of those statistics there. So if terrorists want to get the biggest bang for the buck, they'd hack and damage dams closest to large populations. And ISIS, too, has already tried to hack America's grid, but government officials, they won't say when or what their attempts were. They just will keep us in the dark. So anyway, this Representative Randy Weber testified to Congress about how to protect the grid from cyber attacks, and he said that every 4 days, part of the nation's electrical grid is hit by either a cyber or a physical attack. And one of these days, they're going to follow through and not just leave their software behind. So we have got all these things on the plate there that look like they could bring down our power. So I'm going to scoot ahead here in a minute. If you don't have power, I just want to say one last thing. Stan's telling me to be quiet here.
No, just to take a breath. Actually, I was.
Well, I'm looking at the clock, and this is important. I've got 20 minutes, and that's it. So, look, if we don't have power, besides the obvious thing, we're not going to be able to irrigate crops. If you don't have power, you're not going to get any of the dry goods what's left of them, that's warehoused in stores. Warehoused to the stores. You're not going to get that there because there's no fuel for the trucks. No power. It's cash only in the stores. And the just-in-time thing that we used to have that was 3 days, it's now 1.5 days. So anything that was on shelves, it's going to be gone in a nano. And then the other thing, I guess I probably won't go into because it's really grim. But if you don't have power, our nuclear power plants are going to go into fatal meltdown. Yep. Then you've got radiation pouring into the rivers and the oceans that they sit next to, and we're going to have Fukushima times 100. And that will be poisoning our fish and seafood. So, there's a lot of things against us right now, and we supply so much of the world's food. Every year, we export $110 billion worth of food. So if we don't have food, a lot of the other countries aren't going to have food.
That's right. So it just accelerates, is what you're saying. It's a ripple effect that just keeps growing and growing and growing.
We have done some of the dumbest stuff here. It truly makes you shake your head. In 5 years, we've lost 95,000 farms. A lot of them are small farms. They've been bought up by conglomerates that turn that primo farmland or food land into shopping malls or business complexes. Farmers can't buy equipment when a harvester is $500,000. Some of our farmers, they're just tired of fighting the droughts and the floods and the hail and the tornadoes and getting pittance back. And then, of course, we've got chemtrails, the GMOs, our seeds that have been tweaked so farmers can't grow next year's crop from this year's seeds. There is just a whole lot of stuff lining up against us here as far as food goes, and it's not just here. I think probably the most shocking thing I discovered in this whole deal, we and other countries like Australia, Canada, we're selling off our prime growing land to foreign countries, foreign ownership. Now they're not coming here and growing peas and beans and selling it to Americans. They're shipping it back home. They're shipping it to their country. But they're basically not even buying this, for the food, this land. They want the water rights. Because somehow the world has managed to screw up more than a third of the world's reservoirs that are in serious shape. So we got problems all the way around. Without water, again, you've got no crops.
Right.
Well, I noticed, too, I was reading an article about the United Nations, and they said, well, let's assume everything goes normal, which we know it's not going to. They were going to use food as a weapon to force compliance.
Well, sure.
It's part of that Agenda 21, 30, 50, that they've come out with.
Sure. In fact, Kissinger said in 1974, control the oil and you control entire continents. Control food and you control people.
Wow. Yeah. Well, they're certainly not stupid, these elite. I think people underestimate them. I hear, well, Obama just stupid. He doesn't know what he's doing. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
Oh, he's far from stupid. He's very crafty.
Yes. Amazing.
But, we've lost to foreigners over 26 million acres.
Really?
Is that production land?
Yes, it's agricultural land. Every single state is involved. There's no state that's immune, and also Puerto Rico. Now, something that was curious, the USDA used to put out these reports like clockwork at the end of every calendar year. They've done that since 2004. And when I started writing on this section here in Prophetic Perils, I was in contact with a woman over there and asked her, I said, look, you guys haven't put out a new report since December of 2013. What's that? Well, we're busy. Can't quite get to it. And these reports run about 69, 70 pages, and they have tons of charts in there about who owns what country, owns how much of each different state and so forth. But I'm sure since that time that 26 million has increased a lot. Now, I don't know this for sure that they're withholding it on purpose, but when they put a new report out every single year and then all of a sudden there's a 3-year drought, I called and called and called and wrote, and every time I got a response back, well, it's going to be another month. It's going to be another month. The last I heard going to be the end of May, and now we're halfway through June. No report. I checked today.
Well, when you really start to analyze a lot of this, so we had Red Elk. Are you familiar with Red Elk? He died some time ago. Well, anyway, I brought him to the studio for an interview, and I videotaped him. And one of the things that stuck in my mind, he was looking right directly at me, and he said, you've seen these little children over in Africa and places with their distended bellies because they don't have any food. And he leaned over towards me and he said, those are going to be your own grandkids.
Gee.
And I've been trying to warn people, as you have, for years, get ready. I don't know if a person can store up enough food to last through a lot of this or not, but so many people just aren't doing anything. And you were talking about earthquakes and volcanoes. Both of those could interrupt the food supply as well, or even martial law. They can shut down the highways, and you have virtual instant famine. I knew a guy that ran a grocery store. He said at the most there would be nothing on the shelves in probably 2 to 3 days in a panic.
Oh, it won't be that long. Not even close.
I think you're right. I think probably even a day, and let alone the violence that would occur. We had a bad storm go right through Menominee here some years ago, and what was fascinating to me, and it was indicative though, this was many, many years ago now, the farmers lost power, and they needed dry ice to cool for their coolers to preserve their milk and stuff. There were fist fights over the dry ice. No, we're not even talking about food. We're just talking about milk that they want to keep cool so that they have something to sell, and they're having fist fights over it.
Yeah, that's sad. That's really sad. A lot of who's buying up the farmland and the water rights is China. And China has some of the absolute worst records as far as what their own land is like after the farmers got done with it. More than half of China's largest lakes and reservoirs, they're so contaminated that they're unfit for human consumption. And 60% of their groundwater supplies is rated at, quote, relatively bad or worse. A lot of it's due to the farmers because they've let all the pesticides and the chemicals just run off willy-nilly. And then you have these other practices, that turn people's stomach, like when they dumped 16,000 rotting pig carcasses into their drinking water. They just don't have the standards that are found in westernized countries. And they are buying up enormous chunks of Australia. They're closer to them than they are to us. And they have an awful lot of Chinese people there. But I've traveled in China, and I've seen some of their practices, and they are absolutely shocking. So, do you want these guys owning your farmland and, basically screwing it all up? Their drinking water, Larry and Stewart, is so bad the Chinese don't even trust their own country's bottled water. So Nestle projects that they're going to sell in this next year $16 billion worth of bottled water just to China.
Well, I had heard, Holly, that there's some big, deep wells in Arkansas that they bottle water from, and also in Texas, and that the Chinese had bought them up, I think, under the name Nestle.
Yes. Absolutely. Nestle is a huge player. They're getting a lot of their water from Canada, the states you mentioned, the Great Lakes, and here's one that's really a strange twist. They're also dragging water out of California's Morongo Indian Reservation. Remember the 5-year drought that's still ongoing there? They're sucking out 200 million gallons of water a year during this epic drought on that Indian reservation because, they're independent from the U.S. government and they can sell to whomever, but you'd think they'd want to hoard that water. So I tell you, when countries sell off their most precious resource, you're really shooting yourself not in the foot, but in the head.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is going to continue, I guess, because as we go broke, I suppose more and more companies are willing to sell.
Well, that's
and to think
exactly it. A lot of it's economically driven. Case in point, there is a ranch, they call them stations down in Australia, that is comprised of 10 ranches, a bull breeding stud farm, and a feedlot. Just one of those ranches is bigger than all of Ireland. So it's under S. Kidman and Co. And the family bought the land, over generations, and they accumulated this massive chunk of real estate. It's the Kidman Empire. Now, it wouldn't be maybe as a big a deal, but Australia, if you can picture this, they've got about the same size real estate as the continental U.S., but only 6% of their land can grow food. Pretty much everything else is desert. So their growing land is very tight. Now, here you've got this beautiful empire of land, and it covers parts of 3 different states and a territory, and China is the big number one entity that's lined up to buy this. Well, it was all set to go through last December, and then the government says, oh, hang on, maybe that's not such a good idea. Let's think about this. So now they're in a discussion, as it were, that's going to get delayed until after elections. Does that sound familiar? Put the ugly junk behind elections. Yeah. Well anyway,
getting on. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that land is up for sale, $234 million U.S. And the most tragic thing out of this whole deal is the owners want it all to go as a chunk. So that basically knocks out most Australians being able to bid on their own land.
Wow.
So if they're doing it here, of course, obviously they're doing it for their own people, which would accelerate the starvation here. I mean, we already got, over here locally we have an outfit called Feed My People, and, there's really a lot of people that are living just hand to mouth and minor eating. What happens when crops don't come in because of the weather?
Well, that's exactly it. That's certainly one of the arms of this horrible scenario. It won't necessarily, Larry and Stewart, be just one thing that is the causation of famine. It's likely a multitude of factors, all of them ugly, that just, do the deed.
Yeah, it's sort of like what Deuteronomy says, where he says, your crops you go out and plant, but you won't get much. And we're under the curses of Deuteronomy 28. I think that, we had such blessings, and now we've actually turned upon the Lord. He's turned his back upon us, and now we're just one by one getting the curses. They're just accelerating to the point where he says, I'm going to keep doing this until you're all done. You're dead. This is not anything funny for people listening. He intends to destroy the United States because we've crossed a line. I was told many years ago, actually, that we had crossed a line way back then. I had a dream vision where I was taken to Washington, D.C. I'll never forget it. And I was shown the halls of power and the back rooms, and the Holy Spirit just said, it's over. It's done. They've crossed the line, and they've been weighed into balance. They've been found wanting, and it doesn't matter what they do from now on. The curse is on until it's all destroyed. And essentially, I've watched that happen. And as you folks were doing on the timelines, I think we're about here. Now all we need is some major events to take place, and it's done.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. We're all of the age when we remember America was so wonderful, and there was no place to go but up. And
right.
now
Yes.
it looks like it's just the reverse.
Any final comments you'd like to make? We got about 5 minutes left. Holly or Stan, Larry?
Well,
I had one comment, a question for Stan. Don Foreman emailed me and said, does Stan know anything about the so-called Black Knight ancient satellite? And if he does, would he share it?
A quick answer to that is no, I don't. I've heard about it, but I have no more information than what everybody else has seen on the Internet. I don't even know if it's still around or anything.
Holly?
Yes, sir.
Well, how would you like to close out?
This is a time to prepare spiritually and physically. And the last chapter of the book is called about a message of hope and beyond. There are certainly things we can do to ameliorate some of the difficulties here. We're not going to be able to fix everything, but we can certainly make it less unpleasant. And first and foremost is pray, pray, pray. Get close to the Lord. I know everybody says that, and it sounds kind of trite and old, but I tell you what, there's no truer words. There's nobody going to be able to get us out of this muddle except Him.
Great. How can they get your book and everything? Yeah, go ahead, Stan.
Well, go to our website, standeyo.com, and you can pre-order the book at a discount of $5. So in other words, instead of $33, it'd be $28. We're going to be getting stock in middle of next week, I believe. So we'll shut off the pre-order price then. We have a huge number of orders already to fill, so we're going to be busy a few days next week packing. But in addition to that, on our website, you'll see a link to the lecture where we're going to talk about her book and some of the discoveries I've made in July. And you can link on that. You probably won't be able to get a seat there at the conference. They've been sold out for a while. But they are making available live streaming, which you can click on the banner on our website and get an access to this on the computer. It's very simple with an email and whatever. You can just watch it on your computer or put it on your home TV screen from the computer. And, join us for what we're going to be talking about in more depth, on what we were talking about today and some other stuff. So stay with us and stay alert.
Yeah, I'd like to mention Dare to Prepare to everybody listening. It's the best book out there that Holly wrote. And if you want to know how to prepare and what to prepare, that's the book you want to get. And you can get that on your website too, right?
That's right. All of our books and tapes and things are available on the website. You just click on the picture, and it'll take you over to a part of our websites that tells you about it. And
oh, great. Well, it was such an honor to have both of you on, and we didn't even scratch the surface of this Prophetic Perils. I mean, this, I don't know, fantastic research, Holly, that you've done.
Well, thank you for the kind words and also for the lovely invitation.
Yeah, hopefully we can do this again. Larry, got any final comments?
My final comment basically, my final comment basically is thank you, Stan, and thank you, Holly. Thank you, Holly, for so much research and an incredible book coming out, and I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to your dissertation. This was excellent, absolutely excellent. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, it's our pleasure. And, Larry, I hope you get your lights back on.
Well, I do, too. It's awful dark up here in the quietness. But this has been a blessing. This show has, and I thank you guys.
You bet.
Oh,
good night.
So much so. Really appreciate it. And if we can have you guys back, we sure will try and do that. But thanks, everybody, for listening. And I guess we have to sign off. So we'll see you
before
again.
They kick us off.
Yeah, right.
Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Good night, guys.
Good night, folks.